So Shyam, let's get started.
There are different types of interviews. That's the first thing. So let's get the aim right as to what we are trying to tackle here. There are two types of interviews. Okay, like there are structured interviews and there are unstructured interviews, right? Structured interviews are where everybody's asked the same questions, and unstructured interviews are where there is no set of questions that the interviewer has prepared already, right? They just come with it. So that is unstructured or structured. There is also technical versus non-technical interviews, right? So if you are talking about technical interviews, like if you are going for a coding interview and if you are going to be asked about coding questions, that how do you do this in Python or how do you do this in Java, etc. Obviously, that is not going to be covered in this discussion or in this recording. Obviously, we won't talk about that because there you need real competency in terms of like if you are going for a coding interview, you need to be a good coder. You can't fake your way out of that. Right, so some jobs you can't fake your way out of. You can't fake your way inside the job. Like coding is one thing that if I don't know how to code, no matter how much I know about interviews, I cannot get a coding job at Google or something like that, right? So we're not going to be talking about very technical interviews, but even technical interviews or some jobs like HR and marketing and all that will not have a technical element at all. Right, so let's call it the non-technical element of interviews. So we are exclusively talking about the non-technical aspect of the interviews, right? So in such interviews, what the interviewer essentially gauges is that will you do a good job in this role, and typically that is based on whether you have done a good job in previous roles which are similar to this job, right? So that is the essential funda how they try to look at it. So those are the sort of interviews that we will look at now. So pause. Okay, so to recap that introduction, we are not going to be looking at technical interviews. We are going to be looking at all the other types of interviews where the interviewers try to judge whether you'll do well in that particular role based on like not exactly asking technical questions about the job, but just finding out what you have done previously or what you can do in the future and trying to gauge whether you're a good fit. So we'll call them non-technical interviews, right? So this is about acing non-technical interviews. Now, like I said in the beginning, there are two types, like structured interviews and unstructured interviews. So unstructured interviews are the easiest to manipulate and fake or whatever. Like if you want to get into it, right? And if you want to play the game, unstructured interviews, a lot of them, overwhelmingly large number of interviews are unstructured, right? And it is like, luckily for us, a majority of them are unstructured, and that those are the easiest ones to where you can play the game and actually win based on psychological biases alone, right? Structured interviews are a little trickier to kind of fake your way through. You might actually have to lie. You have to lie about facts. Right, structured interviews, you cannot lie. You cannot get through just on the basis of fluff, like good fluff, right? Even quality fluff will not get you through. You'll actually have to do some lying because structured interviews, they're also good at identifying the facts as to what has happened in the past. So your fluff will not take you through much. But they're also actually, if you are willing to lie about what you've done in the past, right, you can still get through because references are very, very rarely done in the whole this thing of interviewing, right? The only place where it becomes extremely tough to fake your way through interviews is, and I'm referring to this thing of fake because I'm going on referring to this as faking your interview, faking your way through the job, because that's the ultimate challenge. Right? If you don't even deserve the job and you can still get it, that's the ultimate challenge. But that means that if you actually do deserve the job, then you can still use these principles and get the job, right? I'm just considering a scenario where you actually do not have sufficient experience for the job, but you still want to make it, right? Because if you know that game, then you can combine your actual competence for the job plus this game where you actually present yourself as the most competent person for the job, and both together you'll anyway definitely get the job, right? Because you're not even faking it. But just for the sake of this audio note, I'll just assume that you don't feel that you are the right person for the job, or you don't have the exact things needed to ace this job, and you might need to fake your way through. So that is why I'll keep referring to this thing of faking your this thing through the job, etc. But you don't need to fake it. Ideally, you get a job that that you are competent for, because then your job itself becomes easier. Like ultimately you have to get the job and you have to work in the job also. So I ideally go for something which you deserve. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's always a gray area. Sometimes you might want a job that maybe you might not get if you don't play the interview game well. So we'll talk about how to play that interview game well. So coming back to what I was saying, unstructured interviews, the easiest to game the interviewer. Structured interviews, tougher to game the interviewer, but you can game the interviewer if you're willing to lie about facts. Right? I don't recommend doing it because, yeah, it's very unethical, but the thing is that it can be done actually, because nobody checks the facts that you say in an interview. Like for the overwhelming part, nobody checks. Right? You can say that 80% of interviews are unstructured, so only 20% are structured in the first place. Out of that 20%, only 10% are interviews where they actually check whether the facts you mentioned are true, right? So the toughest ones to actually game the interview, like where there is almost zero scope to game the interviewer, is they are the structured interviews where they'll do reference check also. So if they say that, hey, we want to do reference check also, and it's a structured interview, etc., then there's no way that you can like you can fake it, or there's no way you can game the interviewer, because yeah, they are game proof. Okay, they will get to know the facts and then they'll make a decision like that. So we'll look at these two broad things: unstructured interviews and structured interviews. So for unstructured interviews, right, typically they also have an agenda, right? Interviewers have this thing, this principle. Like there's this quote that sums it up well. It's that your past behavior is the best predictor of future performance. Right, and what is anybody trying to do in an interview? They are trying to predict your future performance. Correct. So they're trying to figure out, like, if you come into this job, will you perform well? Right. So in an interview, like any interviewer knows that, and it's true also. Any interviewer knows that your past behavior in similar situations, your past behavior in similar situations is the best predictor of future future performance. Right?
So they don't expect you to get good while applying for the job.
Exactly. Yeah. As much as possible, it's not that you get good. They're not looking for potential. They're looking for proven
potential.
Track record. Yeah, track record is a better way of putting it. So, but the thing is that since it is unstructured, right, how they typically go about is that they look at your resume, and here especially more so for folks who have previous work experience. They'll say, okay, tell me about this. Right, and it's more of a chat in which they try to probe as to what you have done in the past. Now here, since it is unstructured, right, they're not asking the same questions to each candidate, right? They're not taking the same data from each candidate and then making apples to apples comparison. So there is that lack of rigor in comparison analysis, you can say, right? There is no discipline in analysis. And that is where you can game the interview, because of this lack of discipline, right? They are extremely more susceptible to emotional biases, right? So one of my favorite ones, which I've used very well, right, is the bias of first impressions, right? Now we all know that if you make a good first impression, that like your first impression is the last impression, they say, that matters a lot, right? And there's also this thing called halo effect. There's this bias called halo effect, which means that if we find something good about a person, right, something we like about the person, something we find impressive about the person, something we find good about the person, we extend that to all other areas. So if I really like that somebody has good style, for example, right, then for some reason I'll also think that he's competent. I'll start attributing all other random positive qualities to that person, right? If I like Krish as a person, I think he's kind, or I think he's brave, for example. But by default, I'll start assuming that Krish is also all sorts of other positive things which he might not be, right? And especially so in the beginning, the lesser you know a person. Like if I just met a person and they impress me with something, then I might be impressed at actually only a few qualities, like their style, like their way of communication, their way of speech, etc. But I'll automatically myself only, like because of my bias, use this halo bias and like think that, okay, they might be honest also, they might be competent also, they might work well under pressure, whereas there's zero evidence for any of those things. but by default I believe that, right? So this is an excellent first impression bias combined with halo effect is an excellent thing that you can. I think it's one of the top things that you can leverage in an unstructured interview. Okay, so this is something I kind of realized by thinking about all this and going through a few interviews myself and back in 2014 2015, right? That what had happened was that the consultant who was sending me to the company, right? The recruitment consultant was sending me to the company where I had to interview. She said that the partners there who will be interviewing you, they really love folks who have a great general knowledge. So please brush up on your general knowledge. So I was thinking what the fuck is that? In 2 days, in 20 years, if I don't have good general knowledge, what am I going to do in 2 days? At least give me something, right? So then I thought, okay, fine. If I don't have good general knowledge, what can I do? So then I came up with this model. Right? That's the first time I did, and it's worked well since then. Right? That let me, instead of I know that my general knowledge will suck. So when they ask me, it will suck. So let me impress them so well in the beginning, right? That they'll have a positive bias towards me. So instead of preparing for general knowledge, I prepared that when I enter the room, right? I prepared my game the second I enter the room. Even before I'm asked the first question, the interview doesn't start then. The interview starts when the interviewer sees me. I might be in the lobby, I might be, or I might have just entered the room, etc. So I started thinking of all sorts of scenarios that when that person makes eye contact with me, right? What should my body language be? What should I do? Should I say something? How should my demeanor be? How should my confidence level be in the beginning, etc. Right? I went prepared with all sorts of that. I visualized different sorts of scenarios that could happen. Either I could be in the lobby where they'll come and meet me and shake hands and I have to shake hands, or I might be in the room, or I might already be waiting in the room and they might come later, or they might be in the room, I might go visit them. For everything I was prepared. Also to these situations I was prepared rather than actually preparing for the interview. Imagine, right? I'm not even preparing for what I'll be asked. I'm preparing for all sorts of this to just start the interview off so that even before the first question I have given off this impression that I am this sort of person, this sort of a competent guy, right? So the vibe I went with is I prepared for is a confident, competent and a bit upbeat, positive, that sort of a thing, right? So I remember I went there. How it happened was I think I was waiting and then the partner came. So I knew that when he comes, I have to be on top of my game. My smile should come quickly, the confident body language should come. He said, nice to meet you. And I said, nice to have you here. I think I said it in a way that I saw a good sort of a reaction, good smile from him, immediately right off the bat, right? And how I interacted in those first few seconds, right, was incredibly important and prepared also. I was prepared for that vibe, emotionally prepared to kind of handle that, right? So I think that with unstructured interviews, there is this is one thing that you definitely want to do. I mean, ultimately, I'll tell you this interview, what actually happened was that in the interview, this guy grilled me badly, bro. They grilled me badly and I didn't know shit. And then at the end of it, he still gave me an on-the-spot offer.
Okay.
He said and so thing is that, see, people don't know that they're emotionally biased, right? They'll justify it to themselves, right? So he justified it as hey, you're also from NIT. He told me that you don't know all this. I mean, you're younger generation, you don't know general knowledge, blah blah. Then he said that I'm still going to offer you the job because you are from NIT, I'm from NIT, so that bias is there. I'm going to offer you the job, right? So that was his rationalization. That ठीक है, ये NIT से है, तो competent होगा, right? Why I know why he thought I was competent. It also had to do a lot because of the first impression I made, right? And then that kind of gave me a bit of a halo effect that in spite of me doing bad in the interview, right, he thought that okay, let me still give him a chance because I think he's competent. And he thinks I'm competent because of NIT, which also does matter, I'm sure, because NIT folks typically only fairly intelligent folks get into NIT, so that is there, right? But it's also this. I'm sure if I had made a bad impression, that NIT thing wouldn't have mattered, right? So this is how you game the interviewer in a unstructured interview. You start the game from the beginning and then let that positive this thing ride out. The good thing is that here it was still GK where I could be demonstrated to be a chutia in GK, right? It is still almost like a technical interview because if he asked me, say, who is the chairman of L&T, there is only one correct answer. I can't like fluff my way through it.
Correct.
And still, in this case, it was okay, right? In most unstructured interviews, if it's full of fluff questions, right, then you won't even be caught with a quote unquote wrong answer as such, right? So it's even better because if that, what happens is that if this positive impression is there, you'll get easier questions, or if you say something wrong, right, they will give you the most generous interpretation. The interviewer himself will give you the most generous interpretation of the answer that you gave, right?
Okay.
So can we pause this now? So to summarize, that is my recommendation for unstructured interviews, that you prepare for the interview as you would, right, with the fluff questions. Go prepared with all the, firstly go prepared with all the common questions, like what are your strengths, tell me about yourself. That's usually the first question, and tell me about yourself is typically meant to make you comfortable, right? That is what is meant to do. Like when the interview wants to make you comfortable, make the interviewer comfortable, when the interviewer wants to make the interviewee comfortable, he says, tell me about yourself. But in general, the thing is that Pareto's principle comes into play with unstructured interviews, right? There are a handful of questions which will be asked 80% of the time. A handful of questions, right? Just think about it, like what are the questions that you've heard in life a lot. The same ones have a very high chance of coming again, right? So have them very tightly prepared. So then not only are you making a great first impression, but then 80% of the time you're also stacking the odds in your favor to have very tight responses also, right? So that will kind of really nail it, right? So if you have previous experience, it'll have to do with, okay, what do you do here? What were your accomplishments here? How would your boss rate you? Things like that, yeah. Like what was your role, and if you can go tightly prepared with your previous last couple of companies, what you did, like in a very tight way, and also in a way that will help you in your future job. Like what are things you did in your previous job which will help you in your future job, so that you have a good response, and also achievements which have numbers in it or like some tangible output in it, right? Like I did this, I achieved this. I achieved so and so top line, like this many crores of revenue or this many lakhs of commission or whatever it is. Like you want those numbers ready, because hearing numbers makes it sound like you are competent as such, right? Because only successful people talk about their numbers and stuff. So have tight responses prepared for the most common questions. So then 80% of the interviews again then sorted also, that unstructured interview. But definitely I would say spend half the time preparing for the beginning of the interview, making a good first impression. That's what I would say, rather than the interview itself. The moments before the interview, like in unstructured interviews, there is a lot of bias, like emotional bias, right? So halo effect, first impression bias, and all that comes into play. So you really want to leverage that. So I would say spend like 40%, 50% of your preparation time in figuring out, like, it could even be like when you meet them, you can make some comment about, I don't know, the organization or them, or some small talk or some intelligent small talk or anything like that. Like what I would do is I would keep it very simple. No need to overthink this also, actually. I would just say something which is beyond the how are you fine.
Correct.
I would say like basically that sort of thing only, but I would say something like in a bit, I would phrase it a little differently, which generally, like, I mean, is a good indicator of a good conversationalist. They say things in interesting ways. The same boring things can be said in interesting ways, etc. So might want to prepare some things to the extent that you're feeling confident, etc. Right? But no need to overthink this also. You don't need to pull off some magical words or anything. But yeah, the main thing is that make a great first impression, a good first impression, and that will give you extra points for the interview, like which you don't even like logically deserve, but from an emotional bias standpoint, you will get it. Like there'll be halo effect on you, and your questions will be easier, and your answers will be interpreted by the interviewer in a more positive way.
Correct.
Like that's the most important thing. And then of course prepare for the most common questions also. Now structured interviews typically how they work is that there is a set of questions that the interviewer knows he has to ask you, right? All the candidates are asked the same thing, right? And whatever your response is, those responses are compared with the response of the other candidate. So it's a little more scientific that way, right? The same questions are being asked to everybody. So typically the questions want to identify certain qualities about you, right? Certain qualities about you that either it could be, say, tangible achievements that you've done, right? Which you can't do anything to game unless you are willing to lie completely about it or anything, right? Which we spoke about. Like I'm just keeping this ethically neutral. Like I mean, ideally, like I choose not to lie too much, but yeah, like I mean, it's just a sad reality that people kind of do exaggerate or lie to different degrees, right? But yeah, in structured interviews, if they are looking at achievements, right, tangible achievements, then okay, that is something that is at least tangible. You have to give a number, you have to kind of say that so and so outcome happened as a result of my work. They'll also be looking for qualities, right, intangible qualities, and these are deeper qualities. So if you look at a human being, say like the outer, if you look at an employee or a human being who's productive, the outer layer you can say is this are the skills, right? Like digital marketing is a skill, sales is a skill, coding is a skill. But then there are deeper qualities also of a person, right? Like stuff like being action oriented, or being a team player, or being somebody who takes initiative. These are like some softer qualities or intangible qualities of a person. I mean, yeah, like so each company will have stuff that are more significant for them, right? So the interviewer will know that for this role in this company and with the culture of this company, X, Y, Z, the interviewer will have around 3 to 4 qualities that the interviewer wants to gauge, right? So this is what a structured interview will look like. So typically for structured interviews, when they ask a question, right, typically the question will be something like, tell me about a time in the past where you handled X sort of situation. For example, like say, tell me about a time in the past where you disagreed with your boss. So what happened in that case, right? So there's this technique called the STAR technique, okay, of answering a question. Like the STAR technique, STAR, stands for situation, task, action, and result. Right? So situation is like what the situation was. You want to give a background. Like STAR framework is you can say it's a framework of telling the story of your achievement, right? So any story starts with the situation, the background, the context as to what. So you have to describe the situation. This is what the team was doing. This was the business at that time. The market was good or the market was bad, and we had the team had to kind of achieve this, blah blah, etc. That's a situation, right? Then the task becomes the task that you were expected to do. Right, like my boss told me that I was expected to kind of cold call 100 people and close at least 10% of them, say, for example. That's a task that I was given, right? That I was expected to, my boss told me, cold call 100 people, and usme se like I should get at least 1 lakh in revenue, let's say, or 10 lakhs in revenue, like from cold calling 100 people, right? 10 lakhs in revenue you should get. So this was the task assigned to me. Then action is what I actually did in response to that, right? So in this case, since the question was that when you disagreed with your boss, right? So here then you can say that, I actually disagreed with my boss. So I spoke to him. I told him that, this is a better way. I asked for a one-on-one meeting with him because I didn't want to disagree with him in the meeting itself. Right? I called him for a one-on-one meeting, and I told him that, cold calling might not be an efficient strategy, but this would be an efficient strategy. I discussed this with him. That is what I did. My boss agreed. My boss did not agree, but so I did 50 cold calls, but I told him that, hey, let me do 50 cold calls and then let me do this and the other, this my new idea in the meanwhile. So I did that new idea also. Then I showed the results to him, and then we want to go to the result as to finally what happened as an outcome. So you can say that through my own initiative, I generated like 20 lakh revenue because it actually exceeded the 10 lakh also my expectation. And this is where that describing the task is important, because task shows that what you were expected to do, but the result shows what you actually got. And ideally you can keep the result, you want the result to be much bigger than the task. So it shows that like whatever task you were given, whatever expectations that were given to you, you exceeded that even more. Right, so that way, like the STAR format helps because you're first setting up this thing. This is what was expected for me, X, Y, Z. But then the result was that I got X, Y, Z also, but then I got A, B, C on top of that also. Correct. Like that. So you can say that through cold calling, I got like around 7 lakhs or something. But on top of that, then through my own initiatives, I got like 15 lakhs on top of that. So overall, I got 22 lakhs, even though the expected thing was only 10 lakhs. Like that, right? So that like gives a nice punch to the story. So the result thing is important because those tangible results, and it might not always have numbers. It could always be something. It could also be something as simple as say I convinced my boss And then my boss said, okay, go ahead for it. And then I did it, and everybody in the team appreciated it. So that's an intangible way, but it's still an outcome. You're still showing this outcome that everybody was happy with me, like that. Because not all jobs will have such a definable, numbers-driven outcome, right? So in that case, you can say that yeah, everybody is happy with me. So that's also a result, right? Everyone said that I exceeded, or my boss said I exceeded expectations, etc. So task me is talked about what the expectation was. Then here you can say the boss said the quality was much better than you hoped for and all that. So you exceeded expectation. So that's a STAR technique. It's nice: situation, task, action, result. And of course, all of this ultimately serves to convey some quality about you also, right? So if the question was that, coming back to that question, that how, like, if you disagreed with your boss, how do you go about handling it? That means clearly they're checking for some quality where which could either be like, are you a team player, or how do you handle conflict, right? These are some of the qualities that they're checking for. This you can backward analyze from the question itself, right? And no need to overthink that too much also, because typically it will be kind of obvious. So if somebody asks you like, how do you manage disagreement with your boss, clearly they're looking to see like how cool are you under pressure, if there's conflict in the team, etc. If there are high stakes. So maybe if it's a high stakes job, then maybe it's a common scenario that sometimes the boss has an idea, but sometimes the employees have better idea. So maybe they want to know if you're innovative and if you have better ideas, then how do you work with the team, and how do you convince a boss and come up with an even better idea, all that. So it could be any of those qualities. So this story, how you conducted yourself in the past, is actually, the purpose of that story is to convey that these are the qualities I have already demonstrated. I have a track record of these qualities, so I'll bring that to the job in the future also. And since all viewers believe that your past performance is the best indicator of future performance, so the story helps that way. STAR technique is a perfect way of showing what your past performance was. So structured mein clearly now there's lesser scope to game the interviewer, because what they're doing is that they get this information, right? They've asked the same question to others also. Right? So they'll get the story from the others. Now the good thing is that if you're using STAR technique, the others might not, other candidates, if they're not sophisticated enough in interviewing techniques, they might not have described their answer in the STAR technique, right? But they might still have given a number and all that. So the thing is that, so maybe they've given the answer in a good way, maybe they've given the answer in not a great way, but at least you've packaged your answer in a good way as such. But there's still lesser of a bias in unstructured interviews, because the interviewer doesn't make a judgment during the interview. A good interviewer doesn't make a judgment during the interview. Especially a structured interview, right? What a good interviewer does is that in a structured interview, it's only about data gathering, right? But this rarely happens in the correct way, or very rarely happens, right? Because we are all human and we want to make snap judgments. But theoretically, the interviewer, if he's a good interviewer, wants to just take the data and compare the data with the other candidates. So he'll wait for all the candidates to be done interviewing, and then compare the data. That okay, fine. This person said Krish said he'll handle it this way. Shashank said he'll handle it this way, and Uday said he'll handle it this way. I liked Uday's approach the best. Like when I'm comparing this thing, even though Uday might not have had the best body language and all that, but when I compare the answers now outside my bias in my room alone, right? Now it is becoming clearer that Uday's answer was the best, and he seems to have that quality the best, right? So that is why it's important for an interview to take himself away from the bias and away from the people, and not see their faces when he's making that decision, you know. Okay. But वो rarely होता है. Usually they make a snap decision when you're there, which is why you're even whether if it's structured interview or not, you still want to kind of spend some time creating a good first impression and all that, because some sort of snap judgment is always there in person, and people always rationalize later as to why they hired you, right? So that is that's pretty much it for structured interviews. That's the best way you can game the interviewer. And if you want to give yourself a leg up, which could create problems later down the line, of course, but I'll just say this, that facts that are mentioned in an interview are rarely checked. Like it's quite crazy. Anybody can say anything and they're rarely checked, right? So that is there. But yeah, some folks do, like very rarely. So 20% of the interviews are structured, and 10% of those will have references also. So accordingly, I mean, in those cases, they'll actually fact check also whatever you have said. Now, Krish, you had a question, right?
So what would it look like for a fresher to answer these situation questions.
Yeah. So, so firstly, I have not done fresher interviewing. Okay, like I have done for folks with significant experience. Actually, for the most part, I did for folks with significant experience, like C-level guys and folks who are earning at least around 50 lakhs plus. So their experience would be at least 7 to 8 years, usually around 15 years or so, but at least around 7 to 8 years of experience hai, right? For 1 year I had worked in another firm where I was handling mid management folks where the experience was 2 to 3 years and all that. So that is it. So I'm just giving a disclaimer that for the most part that's not where my experience has been. But knowing other fresher recruiters and kind of using some connecting the dots, etc. What they'll for freshers, they'll be taking the approach of looking for the qualities, right? Like I said, in structured interviews they're looking for deeper qualities as such. So again, they want to see what you have done in the past, right? Because past performance again is the best predictor of future performance. So they want to check instances in the past which show that quality that they're looking for. So typically, but with freshers, there are also some standard qualities that everybody looks for. Like one is being open to learning, because freshers anyway have to learn a lot, right? So fast learner, open to learning, so that is something that comes up a lot. Then as a fresher, you want to also check the company culture also. But that you want to do, whether you're a fresher or not, you want to check the company culture, and you can guess what sort of qualities the other freshers who are hired, what sort of qualities they were looking for. Like for example, I'll give you an example. Like I, as a B school fresher, I had gone to this company called Michael Page, and there Michael Page, everybody is like they take pride in being tough guys, like who can push back against their clients and all that, right? So if I done, like I didn't do research, but anybody who does research would know that like Michael Page has a reputation for being those sort of hard-ass consultants, So you want to be a certain type of personality. They're looking for that sort of personality who are okay with having conflict, right? Whereas I remember also interviewing for TCS, I think they tend to hire guys who are a little more like nice guys, not overtly, definitely not the arrogant type and all that, not that at all. Michael Page would definitely hire arrogant folks in a heartbeat, right? But TCS would hire the nice guys. So if you kind of do some research, you can, like, by research I mean asking folks who have been in that company, etc. You can get a sense of the culture, culture of the company, which will give you an idea of what qualities they typically hire for, these sort of intangible qualities. Now a fresher also ultimately, like just like a structured interview, a fresher also has to convey quality, convey the quality as something that they have done in the past, right? Ideally, right? So in those cases, you want to think of, say, either something that you did in a college fest, like some responsibilities you took up. If you took up leadership responsibilities in college, or if there was some academic challenge that you faced, some group work, like some project work, this thing that you did. So anything regarding project work can be used to show any sort of team player dynamics, like if that quality comes up in the interview, right? If you want to show achievement, it can be shown in anything, academics or or extracurriculars or whatever, right? If you want to show that you're extremely driven, etc., you can kind of show that quality by showing how you are driven in something else in life, like that sort of a thing. Drivenness, ambition, etc. Openness to learning, you can show that also. If you're like really open to learning something, if you picked up something completely new and you mastered, if you picked up mastery in something completely new, right, in the recent past, that can be used to show that you're somebody who's very open to learning and you're a fast learner and all that. So those things are there. But essentially that's what they're checking. They're mainly hiring for attitude freshers.
So for a fresher, would FAP work?
What is that?
Future action planning.
So can you tell me again what you mean by future action planning?
So it is like, if I'm not done anything yet, but I plan to do a lot of things in my future, and showing my ambition and my drive for the things in the future. So would that work? Right.
So yeah, it's more of a probabilistic thing. It would work in some situations, it wouldn't. It depends on the sophistication of the interviewer. So some interviewers would definitely, theoretically, the interviewer should place more weightage for things that have been done, or should place more weightage on track record over future ambitions or future plans. Okay, that theoretically the interviewer should. right? Do all interviewers do that? I don't know, right? I don't know because most interviewers don't really don't really even appreciate the theory behind interviewing or the best practices behind interviewing, these sort of things, right? So they do tend to get caught up in emotions a lot, right? So it depends. I would say it depends on how sophisticated the interviewer is. If you can, definitely go for showing the track record. But yeah, see, like with fresher, they are hiring for attitude also, right? And the future planning can show like a good attitude to be driven and to be open to learning and all that. It can show that, a growth mindset. So especially for freshers, I would say like the more early on you are in your career, the more you can get away with future planning and it's somewhat similar to game. Like in game also, like the younger you are, the more you can get by with talk about ambition and not actually having money in the bank, right? But when you're middle-aged, you need to have money in the bank. You need to have something to show for it. You can say it's somewhat similar, where if you're a fresher, then you can talk about future plan and all that. You don't need so much of a track record, but the further you are in your career, you need that track record definitely needs to speak for itself. Yeah, so to summarize that, I would say that if you can convey, say, ambition, good attitude, great openness to learning, etc., as a future thing that, this is who I am, or in, let's say, in assertions, I'll call them assertions, because you're just making an assertion that this is who I am and this is what I will do, right? There's no track record for it, or there's no proof for it, right? So ideally, you want to give something that has proof and which shows your track record of already having shown those qualities. But I guess you can mix that up with some assertions as to this is who I am and this is what I believe in. This is what I believe in. This is what my attitude is. You can convey those things also, and they also do count. It's not that they don't count at all. And it depends on the interviewer also, how they see things and the sophistication level of the interviewer and all that. But I would say that whenever you can, then tell a good story about what you actually have done in the past and show your track record rather than making assertions. Okay, so these are all the positives actually as to how you can game, but I should probably have started with this, with what I'm going to say now, right? Some sobering facts about interviews, okay? Like some things which you just can't control, okay? So one thing I've seen with folks who interview is that, right, when they're trying to gauge whether you can do a job, right? Like suppose you worked for 2 years, for example, right? And you've been doing a customer service job, right? And a sales opening comes up and you want to move to sales. So you want that sales job, okay, let's actually take an even better example. You're doing a sales job, okay? You're doing a sales job for a pharmaceutical company. Pharmaceutical company, and now there is a sales opening in for a fitness company, a gym or something, right? And you want to that doesn't make sense. Ulta karte. You're doing sales for a fitness gym, right? And now there is an opening for a pharmaceutical company, sales job only. Okay, so you've been doing sales for a fitness for a gym or whatever, right? And now you think that, okay, gyms are like a little lame and you want to actually work in a proper corporate, etc. So you think that pharmaceutical sales could be something that you could do, right? So most folks, how they view their chances of actually getting the job is to think in terms of, can I do this? Right? Can I do this? And very often the answer is yes, you can. Probably you can. Like, you have the qualities. Doing sales is about what? Like, it's about having the qualities of like never give up, having proper people orientation, understanding people's problems, being perseverant. All that, those are what lead to a good sales thing, right? So that is the same whether you're selling for a gym or whether you're selling for a pharmaceutical company, right? So the natural tendency of the candidate, right, or for you is to get your hopes up high that I have a good chance. So how much ever you give yourself X% chance of getting that job, right? You think that, okay, I have 60% chance of being considered seriously. Let's not even consider getting the job. Let's say you think that I have 80% chance of being considered seriously. But behind the scene, what happens, right, is that if you see the amount of applications that come in and the number of applications that come in, right, for the recruiter, right, the recruiter gets your profile, but the recruiter also gets 5 other people who are like Krish, who have actually worked in a pharmaceutical company before. So when you look at the demand supply sort of thing, when you look at it from that lens, right, they would not even think about Krish at all, right? Because they have 5 other guys who actually worked in direct competitors, right? Not even like adjacent industries or anything, right? So this is something I hear a lot from job seekers, those who are seeking jobs. Ki, Arey, I could do this. The industry is not so different. Right? This industry is not so different. I can understand that industry also easily. And what I'm thinking is that it's not the fact that you can adapt to that industry, fine. But the thing is that they already have enough and more folks from the exact same industry, from their direct competitors, right? So obviously they would prioritize those candidates first, right? So you're like very low priority, even though you can do the job, but they have like much better folks at doing the job. So now let's consider this idea a little further. That also means that every job is also about demand and supply, right? If you look at the flip side, a few years ago, like when I quit recruiting, right, around 5 years ago, right, data science, and I think still it's the case, there is a huge shortage for guys who are into data science, proper, good professionals, right? And there are a lot of jobs that are coming up, but not enough candidates. In that case, right, the supply is so less that recruiters will stretch their minds. they'll compromise on anything, bro. They were willing to compromise on anything. And I don't know what the case is like now. It might still be the same also because it's a huge demand supply gap, right? But they cannot think of hiring from competitors. There's no talent pool only. Then they'll hire from competitors. They'll hire for the same role in different industries. That also they're not getting. Then they start compromising on the function only. They start compromising on what you're doing. You did something remotely close to data science for 3 months. They're like, fine, you also interview. We'll consider you seriously, right? So very often it has nothing to do with you, right? The odds were either stacked in your favor or against you long before you sent your resume only.
Correct.
Long before you sent your resume. So beyond a point, you don't need to take failures very personally also, right? Because if you could see what I have seen over years as to why people get rejected, it is not at all often because of how they handle the interview or anything like that, right? But the fact is that if it is a role where so many people are available who've done the exact same thing already, who are from who are from direct competitors, so why would a recruiter need to look outside that, you know?
Correct.
And if that gap exists, then the recruiter will hire anybody. अच्छा एक कोर्स किया, चलो तुम भी आ जाओ इंटरव्यू करने, तुम भी आ जाओ. It's like that, you know. So that way a lot of it is outside our control.
Correct.
Actually, you know. So probably I should have started with that, right? And if we happen to be in the consideration set by luck and by all these factors, external factors, then we can use these tactics for interview, these strategies for gaming the interview and all that. Then all that comes into play. But to a huge extent, whether the odds are stacked in your favor or not is already pre-decided by what the job is, what the demand-supply equation is of good talent for that role. All that is already decided even before you have even heard of the job. So beyond a point, just see it as like a probabilistic thing that do a lot of interviews and beyond a point, if you fail, it could be anything. Another reason I've seen folks fail is that, like I've told you, the cultural fit, right? TCS wanted TCS also came to my B school. Michael Page also came to my B school, right? I had sat for TCS internship interview, right? TCS clearly wanted nice guys. From who they hired, I figured what the culture would be like, you know. TCS wanted nice guys, you know, and there was no I didn't know that beyond a point. So there are certain cultural things also and certain beliefs that the company has that works well for them, right? Which are just subjective. That, you know, they want people like this, and you might not be that, you know. They might want some people might want arrogant folk. They might want to hire people who are initiative takers, who are borderline arrogant, who are individual stars, individual achievers, right? And other companies might want team players, and they could be in the same industry, it could be the same role, but some companies will prefer team players and other companies will prefer individual achievers. So if you can find that out, that's great. But sometimes it's not easy to tell what they are looking for in terms of these qualities. So you might, many times you end up losing out on these things because of that. Behind the scenes, these are kind of discussions that the managers have, that, you know, he's good, but he's not so much of a team player, he's more of a individual achiever. हमें वो नहीं चाहिए. हमारा team ऐसा है कि like you might not be the best person, but at least we have each other's back.
Correct.
That's what our team is like. So we will hire, like, that's what the team culture is, you know. Or on the flip side, somebody like a company like Michael Page now, like, I mean, if you're just a nice guy, like, even if you have done great stuff, but they'll be like, you won't fit into our culture. You know, we are all like high flying, alphas here. You know, we are high flying types. We want to like party or like work hard, party hard, that sort of a culture. And this guy seems too much of a nerd or nice guy. Nahi fit hoga, like, and that has nothing to do with your performance also. In other companies also, you will definitely get excellent jobs in other companies still. So failure in interviews, like, can be chalked to many such reasons like this, that if you knew, you'd be like, this has nothing to do with me, or, you know, like, I don't need to take this personally. Like, if you could see that, no? Like, I mean, because I've seen that a lot behind the scenes, so I know that we reject a lot of people not because they were inadequate, but because just it wasn't a good fit. That's all. They would do very fine in some other company also. So that is one thing to consider as such. So okay, that's all. That's pretty much in the big picture. I think then there are specific questions, Krish, that you were talking about, right? That we can actually talk about specific questions. I thought that could be another recording, because this seems to be more of a big picture insight, a big picture view into what interviews are like. Specific questions, and we can probably tackle the common questions. Like I said earlier, that 80% of the time is the same few questions that keep coming up, Pareto's principle. So we can talk about those common questions and what are like some good tight responses to those. As such, we could talk about that. Yeah, that's all. Cool. I hope this recording was helpful to whoever's listening to this.
Thank you for coming, Shyam.
Yeah, thanks.